Welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast, where we serve and support leaders so you can serve and support your local church.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Olson. All right. So last time I talked with my friend Jay Messerer, and he is an incredible consultant and leadership trainer. He just brings a wealth of experience and knowledge. And last time I was taking notes and learning a ton. And I know that many of you probably were too. And so he's back for part 2 of a conversation that we started. And I'm so excited for you to hear the rest of it because we kind of pivot and turn and talk more about the specifics of the 3 circles that he talked about. And so if you don't know what that is, go back to part 1 and listen. And now we're going to dive deeper into it. So here you go. Here's part 2 of my conversation with Jay Messerer. So we first have to, just recap what you said. We first have to make sure that we are in alignment with our leadership. People, our upper level leadership, our peers in leadership, and making sure that as a staff, we are ready for this together. Good. Because we can't introduce change on our own without walking through it together. But then before doing anything as a leader, once you're ready and you feel like your organizational processes are ready, then slowly turning the dial, but first discerning when they're ready, the cultural readiness of your people, of your team. And then when that time comes, slowly turning the dial so that everybody feels like they're a part of the process and not just like they're getting yanked along unwillingly. So is that an accurate summary?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, that
very
is
well done.
Thank you. Well, that is so good. So I think this is a great place for us to kind of shift gears and maybe go back to those 3 circles and talk a little bit more about them. And so this is the point where our podcast editors will cut and end us with part 1 and we will shift into part 2 because this is just such incredible content. So let's dive back in here and talk about these 3 circles: belonging, relationships, and clarity. And so when you're working with somebody or when you talk about this, which one do you start with and where do you go from there?
Good. Normally we'll talk about belonging first.
Okay.
And their relationships and move to clarity. Although the irony is most people will want to get the clarity first.
Don't we all just want clarity?
Yes.
Yes.
It is. There's this fascinating story between a Mother Teresa and I forget the guy's last name, John something. He was a famous ethicist. And he decided to take this break kind of from life, and he went over to Calcutta and Mother Teresa's work. And in that time, he was just going to spend time there seeking God and for the next chapter of his life and things like that. And the first morning he came down to breakfast, he actually crossed paths with Mother Teresa. And he said to her, she said to him first, she said, John, how can I pray for you? And while you're here and so on. And he said, well, that I would have great clarity and in what's next for me and what's going on in my life and so on. And she said, John, I really can't pray for you for that. He said, why not? You've always had great clarity in your mission in life and what you're about and doing things like that. She says, no, I never really had much clarity in life, but I've had a lot of trust. God has brought me to the place to learn to trust him. And in that, and I'm going to pray for you that your trust in God would grow. And out of that will likely come more clarity. So that's why I proceed and start with the stuff of belonging in relationships ahead of clarity, is because we can get to clarity. We can make things very concise and well-defined as to purpose and expectations. But if there isn't strong relationships, high trust, respect, if the sense of belonging is not there, it'll all fall apart. Okay. But at the same time, if you just have belonging in relationships and there's no clarity,
Yeah.
it's not going to work well. So it is a package deal.
Yeah.
But to your question, I tend to start with the belonging and the relationships,
Okay.
getting those in place, knowing we will need to get to clarity in order to get to the alignment and the integration that we're longing for in our groups. So in the area of belonging, does that help before we?
Oh, yes, that's wonderful.
Okay, so we're going to jump into belonging a little bit. And with each of these three circles, there's kind of two parts to it. You can go real deep on these, but I'm going to narrow it down to kind of two things with each of them. And so the first is the idea of connectedness. For in the group, if we're growing this strong sense of belonging, it has to start with connectedness. And that is, this person feels connected to their assignments or their role. They're connected to the team and to the overall organization. Mm-hmm. And there's lots of different ways to go about this and work through it. But as leaders, we have to do that. And now the good news with all of this, let me just kind of put this in. You don't pay extra for this. Okay. And that is, for leaders, you don't have to accomplish this all by yourself. It's not like going off to the mountaintop and coming back with the tablets. Okay. It's actually involving your team members, asking them, how can we grow connectedness? How can we grow belonging? About our relationships? How can we grow stronger relationships? How can we grow, involve them in thinking through, how do we grow this and nurture this vibrant team culture? Okay. So I just want to put that in there because it's going to seem like, oh man, I've got a load now as a leader.
Yeah.
And we're not about creating burdens here and a load, but how you can take next steps and hopefully just in the course. So even in the rehearsal, how are we ensuring that there's a connectedness between what they're doing, playing that instrument in the booth and so on, to the overall and what's happening? They see, man, this is my team. They've got my back. I, make a mistake or something like that, it's not a big deal. We're going to learn together quickly, connected. We're learning together. We're growing together, and a connectedness to this. How do we address mistakes together? Do we laugh much together? Yeah. And actually, that's a good diagnostic. How much time do we spend laughing when we're together? Yeah. So connectedness is the first area. The second area in belonging is what we call psychological safety, which is a big phrase we can really capture in, is this a safe place to speak up? And there's a fascinating thing here. Have you ever heard of something called the Project Aristotle?
I have not.
And frankly, hardly anybody has. I can ask this question lots and lots of times and people don't know about. But if I ask you, do you know who and what Google is?
Right. Yes.
People go, yeah, I know about that. Well, the irony is, years ago, late 90s, Google, and they're known for phenomenal things that they've accomplished and done and so on. And so when people hear about that, they go, oh yeah, Google, they did this. They had a Project Aristotle. They were looking at their teams and they said, yeah, we have these phenomenal teams, but we also have these lousy teams. And what makes for the difference? And so they started to step into that and look at it. And they thought their hypothesis was, well, if you assemble the right skills, the right experience, the kind of clear mission and things like that, that's what's making it. They explored. And yes, a few of those things showed up. Yeah, there was a loyalty, there was a clear mission, things going on. But they said there's something here that we can't really understand. And what they kind of stumbled across was this idea of psychological safety, that their high performance teams were ones where it was a safe place to speak up. And even the teams that were not as experienced, not as much skill and talent on the team, they were actually outperforming these highly skilled teams because of their ability to speak up. And what we mean by that is, if I speak up, I'm not going to be embarrassed or humiliated. If I ask a question, I'm not going to be thought of as weak or incompetent. If I make a mistake, I'm not going to have to live with it for the rest of my career. And so on. So that's the idea. So we look at it on our teams. What are we doing to grow this safe place to speak up? Because many times when there's something not going right, somebody knows why it's not going right.
Yeah.
But is it safe to speak up? And they've found that teams make it much further in going ahead there. So if somebody clunks a chord or sings the wrong notes, how do we address that?
Yeah.
Is it a safe place to just say, "Oh man, I missed that." Say that's all right. Here's what we could do. Or does somebody have an idea? And that type of thing. And within the team. So 2 big areas: connectedness and psychological safety under belonging.
Yeah, that's so good.
Does that help?
Oh yeah, that's amazing. And I think it's like you can run so many different circumstances through in your mind and connect them back to this. Like, oh yeah, that relates to this, and so does that, and so does that. And so it's such a helpful lens and filter. So yeah, that's so good. So belonging is connectedness and psychological safety. So then the next step, or the next circle rather, is relationships.
Right.
And, because you said, you talked about drawing the circle, and they're all
overlapping.
Thank you. So obviously belonging and relationship, they go hand in hand very much. So you can't have, like you said, you can't have one without the other.
Yes.
So let's journey into relationship and talk a little bit about that.
Good. And we, in our last time together, we talked a little bit about this idea of shared vulnerability preceding trust and respect. So our 2 areas here is, first, shared vulnerability. The ability for us as leaders to model this idea of, hey, I don't know quite this next chapter. We've never been here before. There's some uncertainties to this, but just being open with people, saying, hey, we're going to venture into this together. Because so many times, especially in the American or North American culture, we see leaders as someone put up on a pedestal that has all the answers.
Yeah.
Has it all put together. Okay. And really that's not true at all. In fact, no single leader is complete in themselves, in their leadership. Okay. And we do a whole session called In Praise of the Incomplete Leader. And that it comes out of a concept out of Harvard Business Review, 10 must reads on leadership, if you want to poke around in that material. But this idea, in praise of the incomplete leader, is recognizing that none of us are whole and complete as a leader by ourselves. Our wholeness and completeness in leadership is in the leadership team and what each of us bring to that leadership team. And that's why the idea, again, biblical models for this, or biblical wisdom on this, of the togetherness and in community, and as leaders, that being true, what each of us bring, and recognizing that. And we could spend a whole session on that. But my point is the idea of recognizing that ourselves, but the ability for us to be open to say, hey, I don't have it all put together, especially as we venture into new territory we've never been in before, and sharing the uncertainties, or the idea of sharing and admitting mistakes.
Yeah.
Hey, I came up short here. I missed the mark here. Please forgive me for that. But can we, recover and move forward together? So that's shared vulnerability. And that's the precursor for growing the second area. Shared vulnerability, 1. Number 2 is trust and respect. And so growing that stronger, and we talked about a little bit last time, in that combination of noble character and the idea of strong competence for trust. So I'm going to go a little bit further there with trust and respect. Yeah. And respect is so important here because, and the question we ask here is, do I see that individual as a human being or a human doing?
Yeah.
Are they a person or an object? In other words, are they a person? They have dreams, aspirations, just like I do, but they also have battles and struggles just like I do.
Yeah.
And do I see them through that lens of respect? And the interesting thing here is it's almost counterintuitive. Most of our influence comes out of how another person sees their perspective of our regard for them. Most of us think our influence is how skilled we are as a leader or a manager. But most of our influence that's important to be skilled. Again, trust comes out of some competence and that character.
Yeah.
But most of our influence comes out of how the other person perceives our regard for them. Do we see them as a person or an object? Do we see them as a human being created by God and loved by God, or just as a human doing? And in that, our influence grows, but also our relationships grow out of that trust and respect. We could spend a ton of time here. So foundational for the strength of teams and things like that.
Before we get back to the rest of today's episode, I wanted to invite you to the Overflow Worship Conference on October 7th and 8th in Wilmer, Minnesota. This conference is for worship leaders and entire worship teams. And you know what? We truly care about the health and well-being of the worship leaders that we serve. And we want to see you equipped to thrive in the ministry that God has called you to. That's why we provide unique hands-on opportunities as well as opportunities for encouragement and spiritual growth throughout the weekend. And I got to tell you, I know that the last couple of years have been incredibly difficult. And so we want to focus on your heart, and we want to focus on making sure that your heart and soul are cared for in a way that you maybe haven't been in the last few years because you've been so busy running and pushing through the urgent day after day after day. And so we have carefully selected worship leaders and speakers and presenters for our workshops in order to come alongside of you, not only with spiritual growth and leadership encouragement, but also with tools that you can take back and apply in your context that are super practical and helpful for your context, which is the volunteer-supported context. So grab your team, grab your tickets, and join us at the Overflow Worship Conference on October 7th and 8th in Wilmer, Minnesota. Tickets at overflowworship.com. Wow. Yeah, we could probably sit and talk for about 16 podcasts on all of these things. This is amazing. So that just scratches the surface of relationships and that importance of shared vulnerability, trust, and respect. So then that does finally bring us to clarity.
Yes.
So let's scratch the surface on clarity and talk a little bit about that.
Okay. In some ways, this one's the more kind of obvious one that we really have to get to these places. And we talked a little bit last time about this also. But the idea of to get to alignment, you have to have clarity. It precedes that. And so the first area is in purpose. So we have two under each of the circles. The two under this one is in purpose. Is there real clear, concise communication of what is expected of a team member? And what this team's contribution. Do we understand why we exist as a team and what value we bring to the organization we're part of? In this case, in the church body here, the worship arts department, as it were, and so on. Do we understand what our part is, why we're doing what we're doing, and who we're doing it for, and purpose? And out of that comes joy, meaning, and satisfaction when there's purpose and people understand how my contribution contributes to the success and the effectiveness and the outcomes of the team and so on. So a purpose. So we encourage lots of times teams putting together a team purpose statement and each team member coming up with a contribution statement. This is my part on how I contribute to the purpose of the team. And you can do that with your worship leading teams and things like that work out there in there. But expectations is that second area. And we spent a little bit of time on that again before, but that whole point, does a person understand, especially we were talking about new assignment last time and so on, especially in the new assignment, having clarity and expectations, but overall, and can the person answer the question, what is expected of them in a clear? And I would really encourage leaders to have a regular one-on-one with team members, some frequency with them so they can share what they're experiencing. Is it clear to them? Can you hear from them? There's clear expectations of what their role is as a musician in the tech booth, whatever other roles they're in their worship arts department or ministry there, and so on. And having a regular time, some frequency, whether it's monthly, once a quarter, whatever the right frequency is, so people have that chance to share. And yes, we can say there's clarity in the expectation. They understand. They can answer the question. Yes, I'm meeting expectations. or
Yeah.
you can share with them, yes, you're exceeding, or in some cases you have to share where there's a deficiency
Mm-hmm.
and so on, or a blind spot. Most
Mm-hmm.
people miss things not because they're intentionally trying to do
Yeah.
something poorly, but there's a blind spot. And so that one-on-one time with them to share with, hey, here's something that's happening that's actually impacting the group or undermining what we're trying to do, and let's explore how we could make some changes there.
Yeah.
And doing that together.
Hmm.
Quick
Yeah.
overview. We can dig
Yeah.
into wherever you'd like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's incredible. And maybe we should dig in just a little bit right there where you talked about communicating deficiencies or communicating
Mm-hmm.
things that are not fun to communicate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
just, obviously all of this stuff compounds, right? When you have these things in
Mm-hmm.
place and you have like relationship equity with people where
Mm-hmm.
they
Good.
trust you, you can so much more easily come alongside of them. And
Mm-hmm.
when we do it with love and respect as well for that person,
Yes.
it's huge. But even with all of that in place, it's still
Mm-hmm.
not easy.
That's
And
right.
there's obviously lots of different factors, such as personality and that kind of thing, that come
Mm-hmm.
into play. But let's just talk through that a little bit of some things that would help a leader who is having to navigate through difficult
Mm-hmm.
conversations like that.
Yeah. Thanks for asking, because that is a more difficult job, but
Hmm.
it's part of the package
Yeah.
we sign up for if we're in a leadership role, is to address those also. So certainly, now one of the things they found with high-performing teams also was there's 5 times as much positive reinforcement happening
Hmm.
as there is what we call redirecting or correcting type feedback.
Hmm.
So one of the things we have to start with as a leader is sharing with people when they're doing things well.
Yeah.
And so on, because here we're back to the expectations. If we're celebrating together individually or with the group, hey, this really went well, this person really stepped up here and it really made a difference for us, or when they nailed that or that, see how that made such a difference for the whole team and things like that.
Yeah.
As we do that, people go, oh, that's what's expected of us, that's what they're looking for, and so on. So that's helping bring in that clarity in the expectations. But one of the first things to do is what we call positive feedback, the ability to us to just or reinforcing is actually what word we use more often, or
Hmm.
reinforcing feedback to folks, sometimes privately, sometimes it's appropriate in the group. But then, as you said before, as we set that culturally and so on in place, now we can speak to, there's enough equity there to speak to where there's a deficiency or a blind spot. And
Hmm.
many times it's a blind spot. So when we share
Hmm.
something, there's a quick little 4-point outline you can use. Always start with intent, declare intent. This is why we're talking about this. Most people assume the negative,
Hmm.
why we're talking about something.
Yeah.
They're a bad person, this went badly, we don't care for them, that this type of thing. We're being
Yeah.
selfish, it's all about us, the leader. No, it's coming alongside the person saying, we want to improve together. Things that you share with me, I can do better. Here's something I want to explore with you that we can get to a better place in your contribution. So always declare intent. You always start with that,
Okay.
whether it's an email message or a conversation.
Hmm.
The second is be specific. Don't be general. Even with the positive reinforcement, be very specific. Not, oh, you're doing good. No,
Hmm.
you did well in this situation, and so on. Specific. The third is then share the impact, whether it's
Hmm.
positive or negative, because most people don't see the impact of what they're doing when it's a deficiency or something that's going poorly. And when they see or understand the impact of it, many times that becomes the motivating factor. Oh, I do need that because it's impacting others,
Hmm.
or how it's impacting my reputation or how I'm coming off. And then
Yeah.
fourth is suggestions or recommendations. What are some things? Do you have any ideas of what you
Hmm.
could do differently here? Here's some I have, and together working through that. So
Hmm.
declare intent, be specific, make sure you get to the impact, point out the impact, and then suggestions or recommendations and feedback. And many times, and some of your early ones, especially the harder ones, write them out. Go to those 4 things and
Yeah.
write them out and prepare for that conversation.
Hmm.
After a while, that 4-point outline gets imprinted on your mind, and you can just do it on the fly.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. So what happens, and this is maybe more of just like a question that is, it doesn't always happen this way, but it does. What happens when that doesn't go well? Like that you do those things and you try to come alongside of them and do it really well, and it's not received well, it doesn't go well. And what's from a leadership standpoint, maybe could you share just a couple of things of what we can do as a leader to help ourselves like work through that, but then also with that person, what's the next step?
Yeah, good. A couple things come to mind. First of all, again, stepping back away from it and looking at, first of all, our contribution as a leader to this situation. Is there something I'm not doing well in helping this person see it or come through it? In some cases, we may not be the best person to speak to this issue. We may need to invite somebody else that they really trust or they have a quality. And that's why we kind of always go back to the quality of the relationship. Remember, I talked about last time this idea on a scale of 1 to 10, what's the quality of the relationship? Because if the quality of the relationship is low, you probably don't want to venture to this area. And you're going to have to say, I need to build the quality of the relationship first so I can go to these places, or I can invite somebody else who has a strong relationship with them to speak to this issue. There may be another person on the leadership team there, the church that needs to speak to this, that can go to those places. Yeah. And anytime it involves people or relationships, it's never efficient.
Yeah.
It's not a process where we flip a switch. Yeah. We 3 steps where we go. It's not formulaic. So what we have to do is recognize we're going to have to invest some time and energy in this in a way that's over time, that we take steps toward it and in the context of relationship and the candid conversation. But you're correct. There's got to be trust there. There's got to be respect there first in order to go those places so it is received. And listening to understand. We've talked about before, everything a person says and does is a natural expression of how they see things. So much of leading is listening and coming to understand, how do they see things? One thing, it gives us insight as to where they come from. But number 2, we recognize then, okay, what is it we're going to have to invite them to do to shift the way they see things, to think differently? A.W. Tozer, famous writer, you may recognize that name, would always say we have to first think rightly before we act rightly. And so how do we help them change their thinking, that mindset shift?
Wow, that's so good. Well, I am learning. I have learned so much, and I know that everybody listening has learned so much. And we're out of time for today, but I'm just so grateful to you for coming and sharing and just pouring out your wealth of knowledge and experience. So thank you so much, Jay.
You're welcome. I'm not an expert, but I do have a little bit of a head start.
Oh my goodness. Well, we are blessed because of you. So thank you for taking the time to share. And we will make sure to get resources out to people and put them in the show notes so that people can have access to the notes and the things that you sent over to us. And we look forward to next time. Wonderful.
Anticipation builds.
Yes, absolutely. Anything else you'd like to say before we close out? Any closing comments?
I was just going to say, one of the things I sent you that people might be interested in, it's an exercise called Creating Greater Vibrancy, and it's full of ideas in all the 3 circles. So if you're thinking about things around belonging, relationships, or clarity, there's at least a dozen items under each of those 3 that you can begin to explore, of things you can do or with your team or invite your team into in each of those 3 areas. So that you might find that, that is, those listening might find that valuable. And then if you want to read a great book on it, Culture Code by Daniel Coyle, Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson, Leadership and Self-Deception by Arbinger Institute. And that's in the outline document. Those references are at the end of those.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jay. We really appreciate you and look forward to next time.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much and wish you well. God's blessings on you.
Thank you.
Continue to reflect His splendor. Take care.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Overflow Worship Podcast. If you enjoy our podcast, please take a moment and leave us a 5-star rating and a written review, which helps us reach more people. New episodes are released every other Monday. So until next time, thank you for listening.